a little bit, if I may, of personal background. And if I could just say, it's been such a pleasure this morning to have heard such nice comments about the UK CGE framework for good supervisory practice. What I'm going to talk about now, though, is not that. It's about a project I've been involved in for the last 2 years, the making of Doctoral Supervisors project. And the background to it, doctors, as we know, the highest qualifications awarded by universities. Those who study for them universally have to be supported by more experienced researchers or supervisors. And there is now a vast literature showing that the quality of that supervision is if not the major factor in determining their learning experiences of doctoral students and their chances of success and their chances of timely completion. However, in the comparative context, relatively little seems to be known about the ways in which doctoral supervisors are selected for their roles, supported to perform them, and then recognized and rewarded for their efforts. So a couple of years ago, I teamed up with 2 other colleagues, Margaret Kiley of the Australian National University, who's written a very considerable amount about doctoral education, in particular about doctoral examination, and then Karri A of University of Alabama, again, who's written an awful lot, and you probably know as the editor of studies in graduate and postdoctoral education. And we planned a study which was trying to look at these issues among supervisors. We decided we'd try and do it by case studies. We drew these from we divided the world into 8 major regions and drew them from that. We took examples of the largest and in some cases the smaller producers of doctoral graduates. We used the World Bank, UNESCO, OECD and other data on doctoral graduates. And we ended up with 21 case studies of countries which in 2017 produced just over 3/4 of the known global total of doctoral graduates. And these are the countries here, as you can see, roughly 500,000 doctoral graduates in 2017. Of those, 14.2 graduated in the US, 12 in China, and so it goes on. This is not a random sample. To be absolutely frank with you, it's not even necessarily the sample we wanted. There were some countries like Mexico where we simply couldn't find somebody to write a case study for us. And in other cases, we inserted case studies because we knew there had been a lot of development in them. A very good example of that would be Ireland, which is one of the furthest ahead in this particular field. So we got those countries, and then we pulled together a list of contributors. We ended up with 29 of them, who each asked to write a chapter, got together to write a chapter on a particular country. So that's where we got to, and we asked each contributor to write about 3 things. Firstly, how doctoral supervisors were selected, the criteria used by higher education systems, because in a number of countries, it's the state that defines the criteria for a doctoral supervisor. In others, it's the state and institutions. There's latitude within the state rules. In others, for example, the UK, it's institutions on their own. So that was the first thing. The second thing was how they were supported, what opportunities there were for professional development, initial professional development, continuing professional development, and mentoring. And then finally, if and how supervision was recognized in terms and rewarded in terms of things like promotion, awards for excellence in supervision, etc., etc. So we have these 3 criteria. And in terms of the outcomes, we had the 21 studies. The 3 editors went through them all, and we came up with some broad outcomes from them. In terms of selection criteria, this was actually by far the most consistent across the 21 case studies. In nearly all of them, the criteria included, particularly for principal supervisor, being a member of the academic staff of the institution, holding a doctorate, not in all cases. In some cases, it wasn't necessary, but in the vast majority, it was. Research active was pretty universal. For a principal supervisor, expertise in the candidate's field of study. And in many countries, previous experience of successful supervision, although this varied between several, like for example, China and Brazil, where masters would do rather than doctoral supervision. In others, it had to be doctoral supervision. Beyond that, there were a few further selection criteria, mainly in the kind of the older doctoral countries, France, Germany, and Poland, where supervisors had to be full professors and they had to possess the higher doctorate habilitation, the equivalent of our DSc or DLit, to be qualified to supervise. That was actually pretty consistent across the piece. What was very, very different was the second area of supervisor support. And we found that in most of those case studies, there was no formal initial or continuing professional development, or at least formal mentoring at all. That was the majority. In a minority, there were voluntary opportunities for professional development. And then in a relative handful, many institutions have got mandatory initial professional development and mentoring, although very, very few have mandatory continuing professional development. That was the second category. The third category was recognized and reward. In fact, in only 2 of those 21 countries was supervision recognized in terms of payment. And they were Japan, where you get a per capita payment for each research student, and France, where if you're successful supervisor, you're allowed to bid in for research funding. But it wasn't another one outside that. In most, it wasn't recognized in terms specifically of promotion as well, so you couldn't apply for promotion, on the basis of supervision. Although it's a slightly different thing, a number of cases, actually a large number of cases, at least one successful supervision was needed if you were to become a full professor. And then in a handful of cases, there were awards for excellence in supervision or for outstanding supervision. Trying to make something of this, we used the concept of, I think one of Tony's colleagues at Leeds, Linda Evans, her concept of professionality, which she's defined in terms of the set of assumptions, ideological, attitudinal, intellectual, and epistemological, which underpin conceptions of professional practice. I'm doing huge violence to Linda's much more sophisticated model here, but she showed how it could be represented as a continuum, with at the one end practice conceived of narrowly in terms of experiential, intuitively based roles, and at the other end, much more broadly in terms of the need for professional knowledge and skill to fulfill complex and formally designated roles. And she described these respectively as the restricted and the extended poles of professionality. We analysed the case studies in terms of this continuum, and we placed them in one of 3 clusters. Cluster 1 were those we thought were nearer to the restricted pole of professionality. And in those systems, there was little, if any, support for supervisors in terms of professional development, and little in the way of recognition and reward. And the list we came up with as being nearer that pole, it's set out before you there. I think perhaps the major surprise in that one, to us at any rate, was the United States, where there seemed to be very much a lack of professionalization of supervision in itself. That was quite surprising. So we ended up with that list, and as you can see, that list is a significant proportion of those in the 21 altogether case studies. Cluster 2 was nearer to the extended pole of professionality. There was substantial support and there was recognition and reward in a variety of ways. And the ones we have there, the half dozen, Australia, Canada, Denmark, Ireland were the strongest in this one, Sweden and the UK. And then the third cluster we had was the transitional cluster, which historically has been at the restricted end of the pole. But in recent years, there have been major initiatives to improve support, reward and recognition. So there is movement towards extended professionality. And the ones we have here, there were 5, France, Germany, Poland, Spain, and South Africa. In 4 of them, France, Germany, and Poland, it is clear that the Bologna process has been a major driver in enhancing supervision. In Poland, it's also been an issue of low completion rates, and in South Africa, it's predominantly the knowledge economy, the association of doctorates with the knowledge economy that's driven provision there. That's very basic conclusion. That's the book. It will be out on the 10th of December, and I'm sorry for going over, but any questions?